I don't recall the sound of the impact, only the cracking sensation in my chest as I hit the cold kitchen tiles. Thomas stood over me, fists clenched, chest heaving, while Claire screamed, not for me, but for the inheritance I just denied them. That was the moment I realized. Even the children you nurse can grow teeth and bite the hand that feeds them. I hit the floor, my back slamming against the hard ceramic, and I felt something inside me snap. Literally. It was a rib, I knew that much, but it was also something far deeper, the last shred of faith I had in my own children. Thomas stood there, his face twisted in a rage I didn't recognize, eyes red, breathing like a bull. Claire was crying, but they weren't tears of concern. They were tears of pure, spoiled fury, because the money she wanted was slipping through her fingers. "You stubborn old hag!" she shrieked. It's a strange thing, seeing the people you gave life to look at you like you're nothing more than an obstacle. I tried to sit up, but the pain doubled me over. The air was escaping my lungs in jagged little gasps. Still, I looked him in the eye. Not with hate. Hate requires energy I didn't have. I looked at him with a sadness so profound, it actually made him take a step back. You can fight hate, but disappointment? That's a mirror no one wants to look into. "You're not giving us a dime, are you?" Thomas said, his voice trembling. "Nothing," I answered, as firmly as my broken breath allowed. "Not because I don't have it, but because you don't deserve it." Claire let out a frustration groan that sounded almost animalistic. "Dad left that farm for us." "No, honey," I said calmly. "He left it to me. I worked that land. I built it up. I tended to it. And now that it was sold, the money was mine. Not to buy fancy things, but to live out my days in peace." That was when Thomas shoved me back down. Not with blind rage, but with that contained fury cowards get when they realize they can no longer control the person they thought they owned. I fell, and time seemed to freeze. I remember the clock on the dining room wall read 5:10. The floor smelled of lemon soap and old dirt. My body screamed in pain, but my heart was the heaviest thing in the room. Before I go on, I have a special invitation for you. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. It really helps me see that you support me and enjoy these stories. Also, drop a comment below and let me know what city you're watching from. Now, let's continue. I don't know how long I lay there on the floor. Maybe minutes, maybe an eternity. I only remember that when I finally opened my eyes, the house was empty. They were gone, leaving me lying amidst the wreckage of my own dignity. I dragged myself to a chair. Every movement felt like a knife twisting in my side. The air burned in my lungs, yet the first thing I did was lock the door. I didn't want nosy neighbors or ambulances or cops. I wanted silence. Silence, even when it hurts, is the only place a woman can truly hear herself. I lit a candle. I don't know why. Maybe I just needed proof that light still existed in this world. As the flame flickered, I thought about my husband, Julian. I thought about the farm. I thought about the days when Thomas and Claire used to run through the fields, laughing. I remembered them small, full of life and promise. And I couldn't help but ask myself, when did I lose them? Maybe it was when I started giving them everything without asking for anything in return. You know, they say love is blind, but sometimes I think a mother's love is just willfully ignorant. We confuse love with permission. We stay silent to keep the peace, not realizing that by avoiding the war, we're just arming the enemy. I let them believe respect was optional. I cried in silence, because when a mother cries like that, she doesn't want an audience. She just wants to empty her soul so she can breathe again. Night fell slowly. The clock struck 11. The candle was burning low, and the pain in my chest was getting sharper. Every breath was a battle. But I didn't go to the hospital. I didn't want it on record. I wanted this wound to heal where no one could see it. I closed my eyes and made a promise. I wasn't going to report them, but I wasn't going to be their victim anymore either. There are things the law can't fix: respect, shame, guilt. Those debts are collected in only one currency: time and silence. And I had plenty of both. I slept in the chair that night. The dawn came through the window like a soft slap to the face. The house was tidy, as if nothing had happened, but inside me, the landscape had shifted entirely. I made coffee and drank it slowly, staring out at the empty field through the glass. The same field where I once watched them play was now just dirt and wind. And then I knew. The farm wasn't mine anymore, not physically and not emotionally. It was the symbol of a cycle I needed to close. The money from the sale was safe, but my faith in them, that was bankrupt. That day, as I held my side and felt the throb of my ribs, I swore an oath to myself. If my children only loved me for money, then they were going to learn exactly how much it costs to lose a mother. And when they finally understood, neither wealth nor tears would be enough to buy back my forgiveness. The body heals with time, but the soul takes the scenic route. The broken rib hurt every time I inhaled, but the silence hurt more. No calls, no apologies, not even a fake text message of concern. Nothing. It was as if, when I hit the floor that afternoon, I had ceased to exist in their universe. For days, I walked slowly through the house, aimless. The laundry was still hanging, the photos were still on the walls, but everything felt hollow. Sometimes I talked to myself, just to hear a voice that would answer back, even if it was my own. Absolute silence is crueler than screaming. I turned on the radio, not for music, but to drown out my own thoughts. Because every time I pictured their faces, I felt the weight of a question piercing me like a needle. When did I stop being their mother and start being a burden? When they were kids, Thomas and Claire followed me everywhere. I worked the land with their little hands over mine. Claire would giggle, watching the chickens run. Thomas dreamed of having his own horse. We were poor back then, yes, but there was love. And when love is pure, it's enough to fill a drafty house. My husband Julian used to tell me, Beatrice, our kids don't need to inherit wealth. They need to inherit respect. But over the years, respect was the first thing to depreciate. I remember the day everything started to twist. Julian had been gone barely a year. I was learning to navigate the world without him when the first demand came. "Sell the farm, Mom," Thomas said. "You can't keep it up alone." He was partly right. The land demanded more than my aging body could give. But it wasn't just dirt. It was my history. It was where I met Julian, where I raised my babies, where I buried my tears. Selling it felt like pawning a piece of my soul. Claire insisted with that poison sweetness of hers. "Mom, with that money, you could live comfortably. We'll take care of you." And I believed it, like all mothers who haven't yet learned to distrust their own blood. I signed over a portion of control so they could help with the paperwork. They promised they were doing it out of love. And I, naive fool that I was, signed papers without reading them. Papers that, I would later understand, were drafted to erase me from my own life. The day of the assault wasn't a sudden outburst. It was the climax of years of accumulated contempt, years where I became invisible, years where I got used to eating alone while they laughed in the other room, years where my words stopped mattering. They didn't turn cruel overnight. I trained them to ignore me. I was the one who taught them they could disrespect me without consequences. And that is a mother's greatest sin, confusing patience with weakness. The days following the attack were a silent purgatory. I learned to move without twisting my torso, to sleep sitting up, to cook with one hand holding my side. Every movement was a reminder. They had broken something that a cast couldn't fix. But not everything was dark. Something inside me woke up with that pain, something that had been dormant for years. Dignity. One morning, I looked in the mirror. I had dark circles. My face was gaunt. My hair was a mess, but my eyes were burning with a new fuel. There was no fear anymore. There was fire. It's funny how clarity often comes wrapped in pain. I realized that if they had turned me into a nobody, then they were going to learn exactly who nobody was when she stopped playing by their rules. I went into town. With the cash from the sale tucked in an envelope, I visited the notary who had worked with Julian for decades, Mr. Harrison, a man with a gravelly voice and shaking hands. I asked for copies of every document I had ever signed. He looked at me, hesitating. "Are you going to report your children, Beatrice?" "No," I answered. "I want to protect what is still mine." I spent hours reading legal jargon. Between the lines, I found clauses, traps, altered names. They had planned everything with surgical precision, but they hadn't counted on one thing, that the woman they thought was defeated still knew how to think. I kept the documents. I put them in a blue folder and hid them behind my wedding portrait. Every step I took was slow, but steady. I was in no rush. Time is always on the side of those who know how to wait. That night, eating dinner alone, I looked at the town lights through the window and remembered Julian. I imagined him smiling, with that calm expression that always grounded me. And I heard his voice in my memory. "Respect, Beatrice, isn't asked for. It's commanded." I closed my eyes and made him a promise. I'm not going to cry anymore for people who don't deserve it. I'm going to get justice, but my way. The next sunrise found me walking to the chicken coop. My body still ached, but every step was a silent declaration of war. The dogs followed me to the gate, as if they knew the shift in the atmosphere. As I tossed the corn, I looked at the horizon, and I knew. From this day on, I wasn't going to be the invisible mother. I was going to be the woman they underestimated. And when the moment came, when they thought they had finally won, I would teach them, without raising my voice, that some blows aren't struck with hands, but with intelligence. 3 days after the incident, there was a knock at the door. It wasn't a shy or respectful knock. It was that sharp, entitled rap of someone who believes they can enter without asking. I approached slowly, leaning on the wall. The pain in my side was there, but it didn't own me anymore. I opened the door. There they were. Thomas in a pressed shirt that barely hid his nervousness. Claire, dressed in white, feigning serenity, holding a bouquet of flowers she certainly hadn't bought herself. Both smiling. But their eyes were hungry. Not for food, for power. "Mom," Claire said, reaching out, "we came to see you." "To see me? Or to verify if I'm still alive?" I replied, keeping my face smooth. Her smile cracked for a fraction of a second. "Oh, Mom, don't say that," Thomas interjected. "We were worried." Worried? I thought. That word in his mouth sounded as hollow as a rusted coin. I invited them in. Not out of kindness, but because I wanted to study them. Sometimes, to understand vultures, you have to let them circle before you take the shot. The air in the room grew thick. I made coffee. They talked about nonsense, the heat, the town, how much they missed me. But every sentence hid a calculation, an indirect question, an unspoken expectation. "Mom," Thomas finally said, "we've been thinking." "Have you?" I replied, not looking at him. "Maybe you should consider moving in with us. The house is too big for you alone." Claire nodded, faking tenderness. "Yes, Mom. You'd be better taken care of with us. You don't have to spend your final years here." Your final years. The phrase landed like a stone. I smiled. "My final years?" I asked softly. I didn't realize I had so few left. Claire pursed her lips. Thomas looked at the floor. They knew I had clocked their game. They ate in silence, pretending to be polite. I, on the other hand, watched every move, every glance. They didn't see a mother anymore. They saw an obstacle. And obstacles are meant to be removed or controlled. After the meal, Claire walked over to the sideboard. "What a lovely photo," she said, pointing to my wedding portrait. "Yes," I answered. "That was the happiest day of my life." "Dad looks so young," Thomas commented, eyeing the frame with a strange tone. "It must hurt to be alone, doesn't it?" "Not as much as it would hurt to be accompanied by people who don't respect me." The silence that followed was so long, even the clock seemed to pause. They looked at each other, and right then, I knew. They came to size me up, to see if I was still weak, if I could still be manipulated. And the worst part? They thought I didn't notice. Before leaving, Claire hugged me with a mechanical gesture. Her perfume made me nauseous. "We love you, Mom," she said. I stroked her hair and whispered in her ear, "I love you too, but I don't need you anymore." I felt her body tense up. When she pulled away, her smile was gone. That night, as the house sank back into quiet, I sat in front of Julian's portrait. "You were right," I whispered. "It wasn't poverty that would destroy them. It was ambition." I stayed there for hours, thinking about how love, when given without boundaries, becomes a weakness, and how sometimes the only way to regain respect is to stop being nice. I reached for the blue folder and opened it on the table. I ran my fingers over every document, every name, every signature. Between the pages, there was something I didn't remember seeing before. A key, small, brass, old but solid. I had no idea what it opened, but seeing it, I knew it was important. Fate has a funny way of whispering to a woman, leaving signs that seem insignificant until they become impossible to ignore. The following days were a tense calm. No one called, no one came. Just the sound of the wind and the dogs barking accompanied my mornings, but I wasn't alone. Not entirely. Julian's memory walked with me, and in that memory, I found direction. I started writing. Letters, documents, changes to the will that no one expected. I went to the bank and moved part of the money without telling a soul. Every step was a piece placed carefully on a chessboard my children didn't even know existed. I wasn't thinking about the pain anymore. I was thinking about strategy, and as I did, I realized that love and vengeance are born from the same place, the deepest wound. One afternoon, opening the old trunk where I kept Julian's keepsakes, I found an envelope with his handwriting. It read, "For Beatrice when it feels like all is lost." My hands trembled. I didn't open it yet. I didn't want to do it out of anger. I wanted to do it with clarity, because something told me that inside that envelope lay not only my salvation, but the ruin of those who betrayed me. That night I slept better. Not from peace, but from certainty. I was no longer the victim. I was the author of the next act. And when the day comes, I told myself, watching the shadows on the ceiling, I won't need to scream or fight or hit. I'll just have to speak, and they will destroy themselves with their own words. The envelope watched me from the bottom of the trunk like an ancient eye waiting to open. For Beatrice, when it feels like all is lost. Even though I hadn't opened it, I knew there wouldn't be empty words inside. Julian never spoke just to hear his own voice. Every letter of his was a compass. I sat by the table, lit a candle, and waited a few seconds before breaking the seal. The silence in the house was so dense the air seemed to be holding its breath. I opened the envelope carefully, like one opens an old wound. Inside were two things, a handwritten letter and a key. The same key I had found in the documents days ago. It wasn't a coincidence. Nothing with Julian ever was. I took a deep breath and began to read. My dearest Beatrice, if you are reading this, it means life has turned cruel again. But I also know you will be stronger than it. I know it will hurt, that you will feel alone, and that our children won't be what we hoped. But I want you to remember something. Respect isn't inherited, it is taught by example. And you have already given everything. I had to stop. Tears blurred my vision. Julian's voice seemed to rise from the paper. He was still there, speaking to me from eternity with the calm of someone who knows everything. I kept reading. That key opened safety deposit box number 12 at the First National Bank in the city. Inside are documents you must not use out of fear or revenge, but for justice. Everything we ever built together is there. If our children have failed you, do not punish them with anger. Punish them with the truth. The truth, Beatrice, is the only blow that leaves no bruises, but it marks the soul. I closed my eyes. I pressed the letter against my chest. It was as if he had returned the strength I lost the day I buried him. At dawn, I got dressed without a second thought. The air was cold, and the fields smelled of damp earth. I took the first bus to the city with the letter tucked inside my coat. The ride was long. Every curve in the road brought back memories. Julian, driving his old truck, the kids laughing in the back seat, me singing so they wouldn't fall asleep. And suddenly, I realized something that shook me. Those memories were mine. They couldn't take them. Not with screaming, not with hits, not with lies. I arrived at the bank just before noon. White walls, shiny floors, the echo of footsteps. An employee led me to a private room. The manager, a gray-haired man, greeted me with respect when he saw the document I carried. "Box number 12, he said. "Your husband left very precise instructions." When I opened it, the smell of old paper hit me. Inside were sealed folders, notebooks, and a short note. Read slowly, then act. I spent hours reviewing the papers, deeds, certificates, transfers, old wills, and copies of contracts. And in all of them, a detail that left me frozen. Everything that had once been in Julian's name had passed to my name. Not just the farm, but also a plot of land on the outskirts of town, a small agricultural business shares, and an account with more money than I ever imagined. But what took my breath away was the last item. A handwritten sheet in Julian's script. "If they ever try to humiliate or destroy you, use what I leave here not for vengeance, but to show them that a mother who stays silent isn't weak. She is waiting for the exact moment to speak." I rested my head on the table. The tears came without permission. It wasn't sadness, it was relief. Julian hadn't just left money. He had left me an invisible weapon. The truth. I returned to town with the box of documents and the key hanging around my neck. The trip back was different. I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt awake. The pain in my body had subsided, but my soul burned with a new clarity. When I arrived, the sun was setting over the fields and the shadows seemed shorter. I went inside, made tea, and read the letter again. Every word had a different weight now. Punish them with the truth. That's what I would do. That same night, I went to the drawer where I kept the phone. I turned it on and dialed Claire's number. She took a while to answer. Her voice sounded sweet, fake. "Mom! What a surprise! I need you to come tomorrow. Bring your brother. Is something wrong?" "Yes. I want to talk to you about the farm money." There was a brief silence on the other end. Then a held breath. "We'll be there," she said finally. I hung up and smiled, not with resentment, but with an icy serenity. For the first time in a long time, I had control. That night I went to sleep early. My body hurt, but it was a different pain, one that didn't dominate me. I looked at Julian's side of the bed before turning off the light. "Thank you, my love," I whispered. They thought they broke me, but they only bent me enough to see them from a different angle. I closed my eyes, and before drifting off, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. The peace before the storm. I spent the whole morning cooking, not because I was hungry, but because I wanted everything to appear normal. I made Thomas's favorite pot roast, the hand pies Claire used to beg for as a little girl, and the cinnamon rice pudding Julian used to make for celebrations. The aroma filled the house, and for the first time in ages, it didn't hurt to feel the house alive. I knew tonight wasn't a dinner. It was a farewell. I set the white tablecloth, the silver cutlery, the glasses I saved for important days. Every detail had a purpose. I wanted everything to look perfect. Perfection confuses. It makes the enemy lower their guard. At 7 o'clock sharp, I heard the car engine. First Claire, then Thomas. They walked in laughing, talking about trivialities, with the nervous tone of someone who senses something is up but doesn't know what. I hugged them as if nothing had happened, as if I didn't remember the blow, the tears, the silent nights. Sometimes faking forgiveness is the best disguise for a just revenge. "Mom," Thomas said, looking at the table. "It looks like Christmas in here." "It almost is," I replied, smiling. "Today we celebrate." Claire helped me serve the food. She seemed calm, but her eyes betrayed her. She couldn't stop looking at the clock. She knew something big was coming. And she was right. During the first few minutes, only the sound of silverware could be heard. Silence, though uncomfortable, was the guest of honor. Then Claire spoke. "Mom, Thomas and I have been thinking. Yes? I asked, pouring wine. We want you to know we love you very much. Of course, I replied calmly. You love me so much you almost killed me. Their faces went rigid. Thomas put down his fork. Don't start, Mom. We already said it was a mistake. Yes, I said. A mistake. In calculation. Claire tried to smile. We came to fix things. Fix? I asked, leaning over the table. Or ensure I still have the money? They didn't answer. They just looked at each other, searching for a strategy. I smiled. It was the moment I had waited for. Before we continue, tell me in the comments what you think of this story so far, and what you would do in my place. Don't leave the video, because what comes next will give you goosebumps. Now let's continue. I stood up slowly and went to the sideboard. I pulled out a bottle I hadn't touched in years. It was red wine, the good stuff Julian saved for special occasions. As I filled the glasses, I felt my children's gaze following me with impatience. Relax, I said softly. All in good time. I sat down and raised my glass. Let's toast, I proposed. To what? Claire asked. To family, I answered. The one I had, the one I lost, and the one I no longer need. Thomas gave a forced smile. Claire shifted in her chair. Mom, can we talk about the money? Of course, I said, taking a sip. That's why I brought you here. I pulled a thick envelope from my bag and placed it on the table. Here is everything, I said. Claire lunged for it with shaking hands. Thomas tore it open without permission. Inside there was only a letter. His color faded as he read the first line. My dear children, when you read this, you will have already demonstrated that money is worth more to you than a mother. But don't worry, there is no money left to inherit. Everything has been donated. The farm, the accounts, and the land now belong to the Julian Miller Foundation, created in memory of your father to help elderly people abandoned by their families. The silence was absolute. Only the crackling of the candles could be heard. Claire dropped the paper. Thomas clenched his fists. What did you do, Mom? He whispered, his voice breaking. What was right, I answered. What your father would have done. Claire stood up abruptly. You're crazy! You've ruined us! No, I said, looking her in the eye. I freed myself. That money was ours. No, honey, that money was mine, and I decided to use it on people who don't have children who mistreat them out of greed. Thomas slammed his fist on the table with fury. Is this how you get revenge on us? It's not revenge, I replied. It's justice. He took the letter and ripped it to pieces. This can't be legal. It is completely legal, I said. Your father made sure of that before he died, and I just followed his instructions. They looked at each other, desperate. I saw fear replace the rage. They finally understood they had no power over me, that the woman they struck no longer existed. Claire started to cry. Thomas was breathing with difficulty. The air became heavy, almost unbreathable. I, on the other hand, felt light. Inside, there was a peace that cannot be explained. The peace of someone who has done the right thing. Mom, Thomas whispered, please don't do this. It's already done, son, but there is still something you can do. What? Claire asked through tears. Learn to live without inheriting what you didn't earn. I stood up, collected the plates, and walked to the kitchen. From there, I heard them arguing, blaming each other, crying. Their voices were those of two scared children, and for an instant, I felt compassion. But compassion has limits, too. I left the rest of the dinner on the table and returned to the dining room. Both were silent. I didn't bring you here to humiliate you, I told them, but to teach you what you forgot. What? Thomas asked. That a mother isn't measured by what she gives, but by what she endures before she stops giving. I looked at them one last time. They hung their heads, and I, without saying another word, blew out the candles. That night I slept deeply. My soul, finally, was clean. The fear was gone, and in its place remained only a certainty. Sometimes forgiveness isn't spoken. It is served cold, on a perfectly set table, under the calm light of a woman who learned not to bend. I woke up before dawn. The air smelled of damp earth and old ash. For the first time in many years, I felt the silence wasn't crushing me. It was protecting me. I poured myself coffee, opened the window, and watched the sun break through the mountains. Julian always said sunrises were promises, and today, his promise was being kept. Not 2 hours passed before they returned. The sound of the car broke the calm like a wound opening up again. I knew they would come. Not out of repentance, but out of desperation. The money hurt them more than the blow they gave me. Thomas got out first, face tense. Claire followed, eyes still swollen. They entered without greeting, without asking permission. Their arrogance, even in ruin, remained intact. "Mom," Thomas said, "we have to talk." "Yes, I know," I replied. "I was waiting for you." I sat across from them at the dining table. I had placed the documents carefully. Every sheet, every stamp, every signature. And on top of them all, Julian's original will. Claire saw it first. Her lips moved, but no words came out. "What is this?" Thomas asked. "The truth," I answered. "The truth your father and I hid from you so you would learn to live with humility." Thomas took the envelope, opened it, and began to read. His face changed slowly, as if every word weighed a ton. Claire, on the other hand, stood still, hands clasped, trembling. "I, Julian Miller, of sound mind, declare that all my assets, properties, and savings shall remain under the name of my wife, Beatrice Miller, with full authority to dispose of them as she deems just. My children, Thomas and Claire, will receive no inheritance until they demonstrate they understand the value of work, respect, and gratitude. If Beatrice considers they have not learned that lesson, she shall have the absolute right to exclude them from all benefits." Thomas gritted his teeth. "This is crazy. This can't be." "It can be," I said serenely. "Your father was no fool. He knew what he was doing." Claire put a hand to her chest. "Is this how you punish us, Mom, for one mistake?" "For a lifetime of mistakes, honey. For a wasted love." They fell silent. Only the buzzing of flies and the tick-tock of the clock could be heard. Time seemed to have stopped to force them to look at their own shadows. "This won't end like this," Thomas muttered. "Of course not," I replied without raising my voice. "Because I'm not finished." I opened another envelope and handed it to him. "What is this now?" he asked. "The document you signed without reading when you helped me with the farm paperwork?" His eyes snapped open. Claire took a step back. "No, it can't be." "Yes," I said. "That paper wasn't a transfer to your name. It was a partial cession of life estate, which means you were never owners of anything, just administrators. And the manager answers to the owner." Thomas collapsed into the chair. Claire began to weep. I felt no pleasure, no triumph. I felt justice. And justice, when it arrives, doesn't scream. It imposes itself with the weight of silence. After a few minutes, they looked at me with broken gazes. There was no arrogance left, no pride, only fear. That fear one feels when looking at their own moral ruin in the mirror. "Mom," Claire whispered, "please, give us a chance." "I didn't come to take it away," I replied. "I came to return the one you already had and wasted." Thomas buried his face in his hands. For a moment, I wanted to touch his shoulder, like before, but I didn't. I understood something that hurt and liberated me at the same time. Sometimes love must stop holding on so the other person can learn to walk. I stood up and walked to the cabinet where I kept the family photos. I pulled one out from when they were kids, Thomas with a kite in his hands, Claire laughing with a mud-stained face. I held it for a few seconds, then I placed it on the table, in front of them. "There are the children I loved," I told them, "not the ones I have now." Claire broke into sobs. Thomas looked up with red eyes. "What do you want us to do, Mom?" he asked. "I want you to start over," I answered. "Work. Learn what it is to earn a piece of bread without stepping on anyone. And when you do, if I still have time left in this life, maybe I will welcome you back." The wind entered through the window, moving the curtains. Julian's portrait wobbled a bit, as if he were listening too. I felt a tear run down my cheek, but this time it wasn't sadness. It was relief. I turned to them and added, "You broke a rib, but you didn't break my soul. And that is what you will never be able to buy." They left in silence, without looking back. I watched them walk away from the window. For an instant, I thought I saw in Thomas the same tired walk his father had when he realized he had made a mistake, and in Claire, the lost look of a little girl who finally understood what it means to lose something unrecoverable. I closed the door. The sound of the latch was like the period at the end of a long sentence. That night, as I wrote in my journal, I remembered something Julian told me once. Children aren't inherited, they are earned. I smiled, with a peace that no longer depended on anyone, and in that instant, I knew I hadn't just recovered my dignity, I had recovered my life. The silence returned to inhabit my house, but this time it was different. It didn't weigh heavily, it didn't hurt. It was a warm silence, like a coat knitted with patience, a silence that didn't punish but accompanied. For years I had feared this moment, feared waking up alone, without my children's voices, without footsteps, without the sound of opening doors. But now I understood that solitude isn't always an enemy. Sometimes it arrives like an old friend, tired, hands full of truths you didn't want to hear before. That morning I walked through every room slowly. Sunlight poured through the windows, painting the cracked walls gold. Dust danced in the air as if celebrating my calm. Every corner had a story. Every piece of furniture held a fingerprint. The rocking chair where Julian read in the afternoons. The table where Thomas learned to write his name. The window where Claire sat watching sunsets when she still dreamed of being a ballerina. I stopped in front of our family portrait, hanging over the sideboard. Julian stood there, with his discreet smile and eyes full of the future. Me, younger, holding Claire in my arms, and Thomas clinging to my skirt. We weren't rich, but in that photo, there was something money can never buy. Union. And thinking that union broke over the years didn't cause me anger, but an ancient tiredness, like someone who finally understands that everything has its cycle. I spent the following days fixing up the house, not for anyone else, but for me. I swept, washed the curtains, threw out the withered flowers from the dining room vase, and replaced them with sunflowers. Julian used to say sunflowers were the bravest flowers. They followed the sun even when the day was gray. Maybe that's why I liked them so much. Maybe that's why I decided to follow their light even after the storm. While cleaning, I found an old box under the bed. Inside were notebooks with Julian's handwriting, loose notes, harvest lists, poems he wrote for me and never showed. There was also a notebook of mine, from the years when I started writing my thoughts so I wouldn't drown in them. I opened it with fear and tenderness. On the first page, I read a phrase that made me smile. I write to remember who I am when the world insists on making me forget. I sat on the floor and kept reading my own words. They were the confessions of a woman who had given herself entirely, who had loved more than she should have, who had forgiven too soon and cried too late. But between every line was also my strength, the same strength I had inherited from my mother, and which now, at 61 years old, I finally recognized as mine. The nights were the hardest, not because of fear, but because of memory. The bed was big and cold, and although I got used to sleeping on the left side, Julian's side, I still felt his absence in the air. Sometimes I thought I heard him moving in the kitchen or humming a song while watering the garden. Other nights, I simply closed my eyes and spoke to him in silence. "Did I do good, my love?" I whispered. "Would you be proud of me?" I never got an answer, but every sunrise was my way of understanding that yes, somehow he was still here, accompanying me in the small acts, in the smell of coffee, in the sound of rain, in the words I repeated to myself when sadness threatened to return. One afternoon, I decided to walk into town. I hadn't done it in years. The streets were the same, but people didn't look at me the same way. Some greeted me with respect, others lowered their gaze as if they knew what happened. The rumor had spread. Beatrice donated everything to the nursing home, and although many didn't say it out loud, I felt in their eyes something I had never felt before: admiration. I entered the small church in the center. Candles flickered in front of the altar. I knelt and prayed for my children. I didn't ask for them to come back, but for them to find the path that would lead them away from arrogance. I prayed for myself, too, not for strength, but to keep the peace I had fought so hard to earn. Leaving, I ran into Mr. Harrison, the old notary who helped me with the documents. He smiled and offered me his arm to walk. "Beatrice," he said, "not many women do what you did." "I didn't do it out of courage," I replied. "I did it because I learned that love without limits becomes a prison." He nodded slowly. "And now? What are you going to do with so much freedom?" I looked at him and smiled. "Use it to help those who have no one left to look at them." I went back home that afternoon with an idea growing like a seed in fertile soil. I went to the desk, took paper, and wrote a letter addressed to the director of the town's nursing home, Oak Creek Senior Living. I proposed dedicating a part of my monthly income to create a companionship program, visits, workshops, shared snacks. I didn't just want to donate money, I wanted to donate time, because I understood that the most valuable thing one can offer is presence. The following weeks were dedicated to that. I went to Oak Creek for the first time on a rainy Monday. The place was modest, with peeling paint and the smell of hot soup. The seniors received me with a mix of curiosity and tenderness. Some didn't remember their names, others told me theirs with pride, as if stating their entire history in a single word. There I met Martha, an 84-year-old woman who knitted scarves nonstop. "Who are they for?" I asked her. "For no one," she answered, smiling. "But knitting makes me feel like I'm still useful for something." Her words pierced me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought about her, about me, about all the women who were invisible for years, holding up the world without anyone noticing. And then I knew. My life still had purpose. It had just changed stages. Over the months, my routine became simple and luminous. In the mornings, I walked to the nursing home. I helped in the kitchen, read letters, sang old songs with them. In the afternoons, I wrote in my journal, and at night, I talked to Julian watching the stars. I didn't need more. Peace wasn't in having it all, but in no longer desiring anything. Sometimes I thought about my children. I heard from neighbors that Thomas had moved to the city looking for work and that Claire was teaching dance to little girls. I didn't hate them. Resentment, when stored too long, rots inside. I had already cleaned my soul, but I didn't seek them out either. I knew that time, in its infinite wisdom, would do what I should no longer do. Teach them. One night, returning from the home, I found a letter at the door. It had no return address, but I recognized the handwriting. It was from Claire. "Mom, I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to tell you that now I understand. Everything you did, everything you kept silent, was out of love. I'm working. And although sometimes it hurts, every day I strive to be someone who deserves your gaze. I love you, Claire." I cried like I hadn't cried in years. Not from sadness, but from relief. I didn't answer the letter. It wasn't necessary. Sometimes silence is also a form of embrace. That night, I fell asleep with a new sensation. Not of victory, nor of loneliness, but of fullness. Life had taken much from me, yes, but it had also returned the most important thing. My own name. I wasn't just Mom, or the wife, or the old lady from the farm. I was Beatrice Miller, a woman who fell, broke, and rebuilt herself with her own hands. The next morning, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. The sky was clear, the air smelled of fresh bread, the dogs slept in the shade, and the wind moved the curtains like a sigh. For the first time, I felt the house wasn't empty anymore. It was full of everything I was, everything I loved, everything I forgave. And I understood that was the true heritage I would leave in this world. Not the land, not the money, not the documents, but the story of a woman who refused to die invisible. 6 months had passed since that scene where everything changed. 6 months of silent sunrises and serene nights, of slow steps through a house that finally belonged to me in body and soul. I no longer waited for calls, nor knocks at the door, nor fake visits. I had learned to live with absence, like living with an old scar. It doesn't disappear, but it doesn't hurt anymore. Solitude had become a secret garden I watered with patience day after day, with my little routines. Winter had gone. The rains brought green to the fields and a different air to the town, an air of renewal. I kept visiting the nursing home every morning, bringing bread, books, and fresh flowers. It was my new family. There I found those who were also forgotten by their own, and between us, we formed something stronger than blood, a community born of abandonment but flourished in tenderness. Martha, the old lady who knitted scarves without a destination, had started calling me sister, and although her voice was frail, every time she did, I felt Julian smiling at me from wherever he was. One random afternoon, while hanging clothes in the sun, I heard the noise of an engine approaching. It wasn't rare for cars to pass on the road, but this one stopped right in front of the entrance. My heart skipped a beat, not from fear, but from a hunch. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked slowly toward the gate. Dust still floated in the air when I saw the silhouette of a man getting out of the vehicle. It took me a few seconds to recognize him. Shorter hair, unkempt beard, defeated posture. But those eyes were my son's. Thomas. He stopped a few yards from me, face pale and hands empty. For a moment, I thought he would faint. I didn't say anything. I just watched him in silence, like someone contemplating something they thought lost and doesn't know whether to embrace or fear. The wind moved his shirt, and the sun fell on his face, illuminating the tears he was holding back. "Mom," he said finally, voice broken. "I didn't know if I'd be able to look you in the eye, but I had to come." I didn't answer. Silence once again took center stage. I simply opened the gate. He crossed without asking permission, like before, but with a humility I didn't recognize in him. He walked behind me to the dining table, the same one where months ago he had screamed, hit, and lost everything. He sat down slowly, lowering his gaze. "I've spent all this time thinking," he began. "I lost my job, I have no money, no family. Claire doesn't talk to me anymore. She says it was all my fault, and maybe she's right." I stood in front of him motionless. I listened, but I also observed. The way he touched his hands, the tremor in his voice, the guilt weighing on his shoulders. He was a different man, a defeated man, but also more human. "I tried to hate you," he continued. "For weeks I tried to convince myself that what you did was unfair. But the more I thought about it, the more I understood you were the only one who had the courage to set a limit. I never asked for your forgiveness for what I did." The silence that followed was so long, even the birds seemed to go quiet. I sat across from him. My hands rested on the table, old, wrinkled, but steady. "I don't need you to ask for forgiveness, Thomas," I said finally slowly. "What I need is for you never to repeat the damage you caused, not to anyone else, not to your sister, nor to yourself." He looked up. His eyes were full of tears. "I know, Mom. That's why I came. To tell you I've changed. I'm working at a friend's garage, learning mechanics. I don't earn much, but I earn it clean. And every time I get paid, I think of you, of what you used to say about earning bread with your hands." I chuckled softly. That phrase had been repeated so many times when he was a child he probably knew it by heart. I looked at him with tenderness. Then at least one of my lessons wasn't lost completely. He nodded, and with a clumsy gesture pulled a small box wrapped in brown paper from his pocket. "I brought you something," he said, sliding it across the table. I opened it carefully. Inside was an old key, identical to Julian's safety deposit box key, but with a small tag that read, "Thomas Miller Auto Shop." I stayed silent, surprised. "I found it in the shop when the owner gave me a space to work," he explained. He said everyone should have their own key, to remind themselves that the place where one learns is also a door to something new. And I wanted to give you one, because you gave me the first one. I couldn't hold back the tears. I hugged him, and he clung to me like when he was a boy, trembling. His smell of oil, of work, and of fatigue was comforting. It was the smell of redemption. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking. He told me about his mistakes, his sleepless nights, how an old woman in town, a neighbor of mine, had given him food one day and told him about me, about how I helped at the nursing home. He said that story broke him inside. "How can you help others, after everything we did to you?" he asked, voice barely audible. I smiled. "Because I learned that hate only keeps the wound from closing, and I don't want to bleed for anyone anymore. I prefer to heal those who can still be saved." Thomas lowered his head and nodded. "I'd like to help you," he said after a silence. "You, the nursing home, whatever. Let me repair, even if just a little, what I destroyed." I looked at him and felt something like hope. Maybe Julian, from some corner of heaven, had pulled the strings for this day to happen. When evening fell, we went out to the porch. The sky burned in shades of orange and violet. The shadows of the trees stretched over the damp earth. He sat in his father's old rocker, and I in the other, beside him. We didn't say anything for a long while, just listened to the crickets singing and the murmur of the wind in the leaves. "Mom," he whispered suddenly, "do you think Claire will come back someday?" "When the heart softens, the roads open," I replied. "I don't know when, but I do know that love always finds a way to return, even if it's late." He smiled weakly. "I'd like to believe that." I smiled too. Believe it, because it's true. That night I made dinner for two. It was a simple scene, no luxuries, but with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Thomas ate in silence, grateful. There were no speeches or tears, just the sound of silverware and the smell of stew filling the house. When he finished, he stood up, kissed my forehead, and said, "Thank you for letting me in again." And that phrase, so small, was worth more than all the apologies in the world. The following days, Thomas began to visit frequently. He helped me with house repairs, painted the walls, fixed the hinges, planted new flowers. Little by little, the home came back to life. The dogs followed him everywhere. The town started whispering again, but no longer with mockery, but admiration. "Beatrice's son is back," they said. And although I wasn't looking for recognition, I felt the universe was returning something I thought lost: faith in people. One morning, while we were having breakfast, we heard footsteps approaching. Thomas got up to look out the window. He looked at me with shining eyes. "Mom," he whispered, "it's Claire." I felt my heart accelerate. I stood up slowly. Outside, standing by the gate, was my daughter. Thinner, paler, hair pulled back, and a bouquet of flowers in her hands. When she saw me, her lips trembled. I didn't wait. I walked toward her. There was no rage, no pride, no fear. Only love. We stood face to face for a few seconds that felt like a lifetime. "Mom," she said between sobs, "forgive me." I hugged her tight, and in that gesture, the years of distance, the screaming, the greed, the pain dissolved. The past broke, and the present wrapped us in a silence full of forgiveness. Thomas approached, and the three of us stood there, hugging, crying as if we were the family we once were, and that maybe, just maybe, we could be again. That night, I lit a candle in front of Julian's portrait. "You see, my love?" I whispered. They came back. The wind entered through the window, moving the flame gently, like an invisible caress, and I knew he was smiling too. The days passed, and the house had laughter again, voices, the smell of bread and hope. It wasn't the same family I had before. It was a new one, more conscious, more human. Claire helped at the nursing home, Thomas kept working, and I, finally, allowed myself to rest. One afternoon, at sunset, I wrote the last lines in my journal. Sometimes life takes everything from you, just to return it transformed. I'm not the same woman who fell to the floor, nor the one who signed papers out of fear. I am the one who learned that forgiveness isn't giving up, it's freeing yourself, that loving isn't always staying, but knowing how to let go in peace, and that the heart, when it learns to heal, can love again without resentment. I closed the notebook, blew out the candle, and smiled. The cycle was closed. The house wasn't empty anymore. Neither was I. Life, in the end, isn't measured by what you had, but by what you were able to endure without losing your soul.